Hey, Buddy Manning here. Welcome to a after hours edition of the Garden Report. It's about 4 a.m. here at TD Garden. Noa Dalzell
Feels like 10 o'clock at night, honestly.
Alongside, yeah. I'm ready to do an all-nighter here.
Oh, yeah.
So this is what you live for. This is what you wait all season for. This is what I think many of us expected this team to do. And it ended up being sort of anticlimactic. They run away with this game by 20-plus points. They're just basically running out the time in the fourth quarter. They're in an 8-8 stalemate throughout much of the third. So this wasn't the game that went down to the wire that many of us expected after Dallas found something in Game 4 here. But this is what the Celtics did all year. They never lost more than 2 games in a row. They had one of the biggest net ratings in history. And we'll debate and figure out where they're going to fit in, and certainly what they do over the next couple of years here are going to determine where they fall among the all-time great teams. But just going off 1 year of this group, they're right up there with anyone else.
Yeah, and honestly, the signs were there all year, and I feel like we'll be able to spend the whole summer going back and looking at this team and recognizing that we were witnessing something special from the beginning, really. And I thought that the way that this series played out, where there was that bit of adversity, there was that panic, all of a sudden everybody's freaking out about you lose by 40, they're going to be the first team to blow the 3-0 lead, and they came out and responded in dramatic fashion, kind of the way that they have all season. And in a lot of ways, they're like the 08 team. I think the finals, bear a little bit of resemblance, but this team is better. They're an all-around great team, and I loved Jrue Holiday was asked, like, in 50 years, how do you want this team to be remembered? And he said, I want this team to be remembered for how we played together. And I think that's the part of this team that was under-discussed throughout the season, just how together of a unit it was. And tonight was maybe the most together game that we've seen. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown pass to each other the way that they were tonight. I don't know if it's recency bias and it's the magnifying glass of the NBA Finals clincher, but I thought they embodied everything that they had been preaching all season in the most important game of the year.
Yeah, and when you're walking around, when you're seeing everyone walk to the podium, I don't know how many people went to the podium.
6.
So you have that core 6, right? Those are the guys you thought they'd rely on all season, that if any one of them went down, you'd be in huge trouble. And you had an uncertain bench going into this year. And I know you love covering some of the more unsung guys on the team, but even just being in the locker room and trying to talk to some different guys here, you start to realize there were maybe only 2, 3, 4 guys who didn't do much of anything this year. And normally on a roster this loaded, this top-heavy, you'd have a whole slew of bench guys who were along for the ride. And certainly a guy like Shvi Mihailuk or Nemesh Keita or some of those guys lower in the roster didn't do a ton, but there were games where they stepped in and played well.
Oh, yeah.
They certainly were a part of the team structure and practice or whatever it might have been where they fit in. And you come away from this team, especially with some of the injuries they dealt with and rest they had to do during the year, or just sort of sustaining this whole thing. And pretty much everybody on this roster had some kind of role, and that's part of that togetherness. That's part of this team figuring out its roles pretty early across the board and rolling with them. And you throw out the 08 comparison, I think it's going to be one that's made a lot. They put this team together in a flash, and it worked almost immediately.
Yeah, and, I think people will talk about this team as there was so much talent on it, and that's why they were able to accomplish what they were able to accomplish. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the truth, because in reality, this was a team that was honestly the same as the 2022 team on paper. You had a little bit of Porzingis, and you swapped out Marcus Smart for Jrue Holiday. So I do think it ended up being an upgrade, in the way that Jrue Holiday played during this playoff run was honestly unreal. But I think more than that, you just saw buy-in and complete buy-in into a system and into a culture and into a sacrifice that everybody was totally on board with. And you mentioned the bench players. I thought Sam Hauser was like such an unsung hero tonight.
I didn't think he was going to play in the finals.
I thought that was one of the best games I've ever watched him play. Besides, I don't even know how many points he ended up with, maybe like 8 or something like that. But he looked like he was on springs. I mean, I was like locked into watching him at certain points. He was jumping higher than I've ever seen him jump. He was diving on loose balls, grabbing offensive rebounds. I mean, he just looked awesome. Like, he just gave them the lift that they needed, and I think that's part of why Pritchard didn't really get much run, because Sam was just filling that role so well. Obviously, the 3 seconds that Pritchard played got more press. I know you weren't all in the press conference all the time, but Pritchard's 3-second play got more airtime than multiple guys' entire careers that in the presser today. I think everybody wanted to appreciate how eventful that was.
It was the moment you'll remember because it had the other moment attached to it. He did it twice. He did this
twice in this series,
and
how many other times, And so there were so many heroes in this team, and I thought, obviously, Jaylen Brown's going to be a big story. Finals MVP. It's kind of unreal to think about where he was a year ago and where he was today. Nobody would have imagined that Jaylen Brown could be Finals MVP. Not to mention the fact that not one ESPN analyst had Jaylen Brown winning Finals MVP as of 2 weeks ago. I'm just going to put that out there. I was shocked when I saw that, and I still can't believe that's the case, because that was after the postseason run that he was having.
And I would have voted Tatum just because he had this slam-the-door performance at the end when they needed it. The passing throughout the series was pristine and the best we've ever seen from him. And he absorbed the pressure Dallas threw at him. And I thought his passing and his versatile approach throughout the playoffs set a real tone for this team. And Brown deserved the East Finals MVP. Not saying he didn't deserve this one. I was surprised to hear his name. And obviously everybody in the buildings had a little bit of a gasp. And up on the Stadium, they went crazy.
Surprised. But I think the defense is where he got the edge.
Yeah.
What he did defensively in the series, and whether it was Luka missing shots.
I'm sure to some degree.
Yeah, and I know with guys like Luka, it's like you don't know how much you can attribute it to Brown versus himself, but he was an awesome defender.
He was a tone setter for this team this year.
Yeah, I did think Tatum stole tonight though with that performance.
It affirmed their partnership too. The fact that you could go back and forth and debate between them, and you saw so much cohesion between them, especially over the last couple games here. The amount that they passed to each other. The way that they uplifted each other in many ways, and they're both just involved in so many parts of this roster, so many parts of this game plan. And big picture, that's the thing you're going to look at here and take away from this season in the last couple of years is we talked over and over and over again about whether these guys could make it work and whether that was an ideal combination or whether you could split them up, get pieces that fit better together. Or, you had the whole Kevin Durant thing at one point, too, which, of course, would have sent Brown out the door alongside Derek White and others who would have been part of this core. The fact that they stuck with them, probably a tough decision, probably one that involved a lot of debate, but one that I think Brad Stevens was pretty steadfast about. They were never going to trade Jaylen Brown, and that... We'll talk about White and Holiday and all these other great moves he made. The most important move he made was the one he didn't, which was not trading Brown. And the fact that, he's a Hall of Famer now off this Finals MVP.
About,
East Finals MVP. Those are two major accolades, along with however many All-NBAs he racks up throughout his career. That wasn't certain going in this year. In fact, in November, we didn't really know where he fit in on this roster. So that is kind of the craziest part of the night is that he ended up being so central to what they did here.
Yeah, and I think the Jaylen Brown story arc is a good reminder for people to not indict people. Like, that's something that I see all the time, where 2 games into the season, people were saying, I don't know if Jaylen Brown fits on this team. I see Porzingis' role. I see what Drew Holiday and Derek White are going to do. I don't know about Jaylen Brown in this offense. And then 6 months later, like you said, he's a Hall of Famer, right? So, and I think we saw that with so many people. We saw that with guys like Sam Hauser. Is he going to be able to bounce back from an abysmal conference finals? He was instrumental during this finals run. So there were so many storylines. I think that's what makes covering a team and following a team so fun, is being able to see individuals retell their narratives and kind of take control of those narratives. And the coolest thing that Jaylen Brown said tonight, in my opinion, was that a year ago, this would have felt like vindication. This would have felt like redemption, that after not being named All-NBA or All-Defense and, all the different snubs that he's had in his life, now he gets the highest individual accolade. And he said, now I don't really care about it. The individual accolade doesn't really mean much to me. And I totally buy it because of the way that he talked about it, the way that he immediately wanted to share it with Jason Tatum. And I think that it's kind of like when you let that go and when he let the individual accolades go is when they actually came back to him.
We're running out of space. We're running out of time. It's 4:05, so we'll start to wrap this up. There'll be plenty of time over the summer to look back on this and look ahead, because this is a team that's going to stay together, that's going to have favorite status probably to repeat going into next year, and they'll have to make some moves around the edges of the roster and decisions certainly here. But the core is intact. We'll see what happens with White. But looking back one more time, this is obviously your first year covering the team, and you see a championship. What was your favorite part of covering it? Maybe favorite moment? Where do you go with that?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think the best part of it was watching joyful basketball. I love basketball, right? That's why I want to be in this space. And so being able to watch people play basketball the way that they did, with such a team first approach, such a not about me, about us, it was like a beautiful experience, honestly. And so being able to see that pay off, being able to see that from the beginning you go from like that as a principle to now you're raising the banner, you know, raising the championship trophy. Like it was pretty awesome. And then just like growing up in Boston and growing up coming here, being able to be sitting here right now at 4 a.m. with the confetti on the ground, like that's super cool as well.
Yeah, and people would be surprised, but covering Joe to me, and we saw him, he was walking around here with his wife for a while, taking this all in. He was the last person in the building around 3:30. He was different, and he's a guy who embraced being different. You didn't see his personality, you didn't see who he was last year because he was in such a difficult position. But he, as tough as he was on us at times, as much as he would clap back to some of our questions and our narratives and whatever it might have been, I always appreciate how he took us inside and was willing to talk X's and O's, was willing to talk about why they would do certain things. And I felt like I learned the game because I didn't play the game at a high level. I've watched the game a lot, but his approach at the podium and his ability, you know, what he would embrace more than anything else was just explaining the game, explaining why they did things. And you can sort of go back and just see how his imprint, how his philosophies impacted this team. The amount of threes they shot, taking shots as quickly as they did, reduced their turnovers from over 2 years ago. The offensive rebounding component, you saw that throughout. And he showed a flexibility this year that was really impressive and showed a lot of growth on his part over last year. So covering him, surprisingly, because I know you weren't here last year, but yeah. I stopped going to his pressers last year. It was so boring. It was so nondescript.
They weren't boring this year.
This year there were a lot of crazy moments. There were a lot of tense moments. But there were a lot of learning moments, too, for me, and I'll always appreciate that about this run, is how much I just learned about not only what they were doing and was able to implement that into my coverage, but just basketball in general. Like, I feel like I'm a smarter basketball evaluator having covered this team, and, you know, I don't want to call them revolutionary or anything this year, but they were a pretty dynamic
I was
team.
biting back that word. I do think revolutionary may be extreme, but
what they did was they stole every advantage they could, and that's how they end up being.
And I don't know
dominant.
that we've seen a team like that was so focused on, you know, the details, the margins. I mean, how many times have we heard those words? They're not quotes that people like to read. They're boring, right? But that was the system, right? The system was all about those things, and it reverberated in every question. I mean, you couldn't ask a question where it didn't come up because that was the truth. That's how he viewed the game, and that's how I think this team was able to kind of master the art of playing basketball in a lot of ways.
Well, that's the last word here from the finals. Celtics win their 18th championship, and congrats to Noa Dalzell, who had a sensational year covering this team. It was great to have you on here throughout. Great to talk to you every night, and a lot of great years to come in basketball coverage, I'm sure, for Noa Dalzell here. As well as the whole CLNS Media team. Of course, if you watched our post-game edition here live, lots of thanks out to everybody who was part of the coverage this year, behind the scenes, on camera, behind the camera. It was great, and thanks to all of you for watching, for tuning in, and we will be back soon enough with off-season coverage and more looks back at this championship run for the Celtics. Again, for Noa Dalzell from Celtics Blog, thanks to all the guys over at CelticsBlog.com, too, who help us pump out great content over there, including Bill, our great editor
Shout out
over
Bill.
there. I'm Bobby Manning, and that's a wrap. 2024 complete. Celtics are champions. Let's do it again next year. Hey, Bobby Manning here. If you made it this far, you probably enjoyed this video, so subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out our social media platforms at Celtics CLNS